and welcome to VOW, Voices of Wisdom, the show that might not be for everybody, but everybody needs to watch this show. Today, our topic is going to be controlling the narrative. Now, what does it mean to control the narrative? In life, there are things we cannot control. Where we are born, the color of our skin, our parents, or the rapid pace of change in our personal lives and in our societies. In the face of uncontrollable societies and variables, every person, young and old, possesses the power of narrative and the ability to formulate new realities and ideas. Stories are blank canvases in which the author is in control, using the past and the imagination to create a new reality. Controlling the narrative can be beneficial for the manipulator for many reasons. They can decide whether they are the hero, deserving praise, or the victim in the sympathy. They can decide whether they are the hero, deserving praise, or the victim in need of sympathy. In either situation, the accompanying actor is the villain. So, what is narrative change? A simple definition is changing the collective story we tell ourselves in order to support policymaking. The narrative initiative says this work is about changing the shared interpretation of how the world works, but of course, it's more complicated than that. And today, I have my esteemed guest, Dr. Georgette Grier-Key, historian and professor at Medgar Evers College. Thank you, Georgette, for being here today. You're going to help us talk about this today, aren't you?
Yes, and thank you for having me once again. Um, it's a topic that we need to discuss more than ever. And given today where we are in November, just a few days away from the midterm elections, we need to have this conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what is your real conversation you want to have that really can be effective, or what is effective, or what is effective to our lives and our community and this society when it comes to controlling the narrative? I mean, we can talk about it in politics ways and education. There's so many different angles that I think we can talk about dealing with controlling the narrative.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a narrative is a powerful thing. It's very powerful because it can change hearts.
Mm.
If we go back to some of the earliest stories and we look at some of the narratives that were written in regards to uh, enslaved persons that took their freedom and really writing about their narrative, their story, and their journey and the cruelty, it changed the hearts of people. So it can be powerful in that it brings about a change that is necessary. It can change a societal ill. But then what we've seen in recent years is that it could also spark outrage. It could spark violence. So a narrative is really important, and I think we have to be responsible with our narratives. But it is hard to do when you have it controlled by a few people for the many. And that's what we have to really start to examine. I mean, we don't control network television, print media, but there has been recent change. Recent change in the fact that we have social media, we are recording things with our phones. It's in the hands of a lot of people. And then more recently, you'll see that there's been move for censorship. So narratives are one of the most powerful tools that have been used to get across a message. Even if it's a narrative of words, it could be a narrative of pictures. You know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Absolutely.
So I think that we have to really take accountability and ownership for narratives.
As a professor, I think, and I know you are an awesome professor, I just have to put that out there. And I know you make it a point of making sure you share certain things with your students. So I think controlling a narrative, you probably share that, even how they write and how they present themselves. So share a little bit of that with us, what you kind of,
Well, absolutely. One thing that I want to say is that our lives are curated, right? And they're curated by us. And sometimes we're stuck in silos and we don't have a world view, an understanding. And so we choose what radio stations we want to hear, what songs we want to hear, what we're reading or listening to or watching. And that could be a very dangerous thing, because if you only know one thing or one way, or you've only saw on TV and only read in the news media that has a single perspective, um, that's not good. And so what I try to teach, and practice in my own life is to look at both sides. What is the comparison? What are the other counterparts saying? What are the facts? And in teaching that, it gives you a clearer understanding. When you think about students and young people, and sometimes even adults, we tend to rely on a source that we believe have that trusted responsibility. I know there's plenty of conversations where you go to the doctor and you believe that doctor's doing the right thing for you, or if you look on a cereal box and it says this is good for you, but you read the ingredients, you're like, this is killing you. So these narratives are important, but teaching and giving the tools on how to really deconstruct the preconceived notions and narratives that have been put out there for you, that you don't assign to, you don't subscribe to, but these narratives that have been preordained by a few people, is sometimes believed if it comes from a source that is supposed to be trusted. So whether it's the news, right, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a teacher, but I think that with giving those titles, even elected officials, this is a lot. And for that matter, if you think about a police officer, these a fireman, all of these titles and positions and people of power, we give them that public face and that public respect, and not there's not a broad brushstroke that we're judging anyone, but these is sometimes can be a misconception. Just recently, we find out different things that happen in the medical field. Well, you took a oath to ethics. If you're an elected official, didn't you, swear to uphold the Constitution? So we know that that always doesn't hold tight in the response of how they should be responsible for their narratives, their actions, especially public facing. So looking at the records and making sure that we're able to decipher the information of what's correct, what's wrong, what needs to change. But we can't do that if we're not together and collective.
so you mentioned the Constitution. How would that kind of tie in with controlling a narrative? Yes or no?
I think that it plays a part. When I think about the Constitution, especially the First Amendment, we talk about freedom of speech, freedom of press, but there's also a caveat in there that we don't always discuss, and that is the right for us to petition the government to redress our grievances. And when we're not allowed to do that, it becomes a problem, because now you're violating our constitutional right, and stopping us from presenting another narrative. And so, even in the First Amendment, it talks about that we're able to redress something that may be a law, may be a policy. But if you block us from doing that, you give voice to a few. There's groups out there now that want to decide what we can read, right? They want to decide what children can be taught. And I think that it's a dangerous narrative when we start to censor and dictate what students can learn from a voices of few and a misinformed decision.
And as we know, a lot of our history, I mean, we just learned about Black Wall Street not too long ago, and so many other similar issues like that happen all over the country. So, like you were saying, a lot of this stuff is being not being taught, but a lot of stuff haven't even been taught. So that's another narrative. How do you think that we should be able to change that, or how that has to affect in the long run the generations to come? Because they, as you know, our parents teach us, and what we were taught in the household, what we're taught in school, has a lot to do with our lives as we continue.
Yeah, it just came to my mind when you said that is, there's that old saying, um, if you want to hide something, put it in writing, put it in a book. And now that we've started to publish books, publish more stories, stories that are nuanced in the black story, the black history, the American experience, they're being banned. And, when you think about this, this is not, an American tradition to ban books. To burn books, I mean, we've seen it with CDs in the hip hop world earlier on, but I do think that we have to look at redressing this topic of who's the narrative, who's writing the narrative. I will say that just like, African Americans in this country have had an alternative calendar, just like now we have Juneteenth as a celebration that everyone knows about, but we've been celebrating it for decades. I will say the same thing goes with our narrative. While the stories may not have been mainstream, the stories were there and they were written down. Papers like the Amsterdam News was one of the papers that would advertise our stories. So we have been able to document our stories, our oral histories, which sometimes aren't given the same respect. But I think that we've been able to do that. But it's a matter of sharing it now. How do we share it? How do we get it on that main stage? How do we get it on that network? And so there is a discrepancy in who gets to decide on what is being seen, what is being funded to become a project that is now viewed by the many.
I mean, even talking about education, the SATs, you know, that has to be another topic that we need to bring in to talk about at this time. So, what is your take on the SATs?
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about standardized, anything that's standardized testing, anything that, like one of the things that we can talk about too is coding. There was a documentary of a young lady who did a documentary on coding because as we start to think about AI, this artificial intelligence and face recognition, well, we know that there's been a problem with it because the coders who are writing the software, they're not including BIPOC, faces. They're
Okay.
not including African Americans. So again, who's controlling that narrative and who is
Absolutely.
creating it? And so looking at any standardized test, we already know whether it's a SAT, whether it's a police officer test, a lot of civil service tests. We know that there seems to be some bias in that because we're not included in writing. There's no inclusion, there's no diversity. And so from what point of view um, are you gauging your test from? What point of view are you telling your story? And from what lens did you get this research from? So we need to look at the traditional frameworks that have been put in place and has been the standard and kind of the rubric on what goes forward and what doesn't.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think, what you're saying is so profound because this is the basis of what basic society is based on. You're taking a test, and if you don't pass the test, and then so many other dynamics to that that affects a certain group of people.
Absolutely.
And that comes down to even economics.
Oh,
It comes down to housing. I mean, it ends up so many different areas where it affects. And so, even with economics, how do you feel that that is also kind of affects?
that is a loaded question, but what I will say is, just recently we just passed the Pay Transparency Act in New York. It's all in the city. It's not on Long Island, but that's one of the ways.
Could you
Why?
explain to us what that is?
Well, what's happened has been a wage gap for many years, where for over 15 years we know that it existed, and there's been nothing that's been done about equal pay for women. Um, some women get paid 83 cents to the man's dollar. And then if you go down the line, it goes lower. If you're an African American woman, maybe 67. And if you're Latino, or it goes down the line, that we are not being paid our fair share. Um, who made this up? Where's that narrative? Where did that come from? But thankfully, we're moving in the right direction and trying to address this. And everyone's salary will now be on view. So there's no more veil of secrecy about who's getting paid what. So I think that's something that we can look at. And again, it goes back to the numbers, the statistics, and trying to keep things quiet. We can't keep quiet anymore. We have to tell our story.
Absolutely.
Because again, the people who are disproportionately affected by, these narratives that are told, it ends up being the people who are the most vulnerable. Our seniors, our single moms, even the imprisoned people who, when we seen COVID, that was a big problem. But I do think in other areas too, if you live in a certain area, your insurance may be different. So there's so many different narratives, and I think formulas that have been created in the secrecy, and we're trying to uncover that and deconstruct it.
It's interesting because you say formulas. I just want to, I did my own little makeup thing. I saw this and I had to redo this and show how it's like a cycle, a vicious cycle. Interest rates are high, you default on the loan, and then there's your credit scores are low. So then it goes like a vicious cycle, and that really affects the income, that affects a certain group of people, again, like you were saying. So all of this really has a lot to do, again, with controlling the narrative. And we have to really find a way to, and I think we are, in a sense, trying to find a way to expose this and to make it known and to counteract this. And we have so many different ways, like the NAACP brings out, certain things that happen. Remember, was it 2019 where they had that 3-year Newsday investigation uncovering the widespread effect of unequal treatment by the real estate agency?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about going back to NAACP and the precursor, the Niagara Manifesto, in 1905, it lists all of these things that we're talking about. And when we talk about the word liberty, which now sometimes is being used as a dog whistle, but liberty means having access to that social, that economic, and political access and capital. And not everyone is having access to that. So I think in terms of fighting for a free public quality education, not just anything, but a free quality, having adequate housing, decent and adequate housing is something that we deserve. And we want to have access to the economic, all the things that consist of having jobs that we qualify for, and not being denied access to banking, not being, for small business loans. So there's so many things that we can talk about, even thinking about this whole student debt thing. Debt is debt, and debt hurts you.
Absolutely.
And so we need to look at, disproportionately, women are the ones who have the largest amount of student loans. And so even looking at this forgiveness is an opportunity if you qualify for it. But we want to look at what it is to be an American. And when you think about being American, we should be able to have the same exact thing that everybody else wants for their mother, their sister, their daughter, their brother, their father. And so looking at that, that's a basic human right, that we want to have adequate housing, that we want to have access to, to be able to make a future for our families. And the only way you can do that is in communities. So we hope that by talking about the narrative that's set before us, we're able to change the narrative.
Yes. I saw this statement by W.E. Du Bois called The Veil, and he says that the veil stands for all that separates the races from each other and is a marker of a loss. And that's something that, like you said, there's disparity that's been across this country, we can go back, you know. We talk about, I think about Black Wall Street and so many different areas where, you know, they have the saying, you know, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. You know, saying, yeah, I see your face.
I didn't mean to stop your thought. But when I hear that, it just makes the hairs on my neck stand up. Because it's like, how can you pull yourself up from the bootstraps if there is institutional and structural isms and barriers that are purposefully making sure that you are not able to? And then the other word that comes to mind is deceptionalism, because they see one person or one a great person who's black to have done for themselves, and they think, oh, well, why can't you? Well, there are a lot of factors. We talked earlier about education. We talked about where you live. All of these play into the stratification of who you are as a person and how you're being judged. I always say, have you ever filled out an application and they ask you about your mother and her highest level of education and all of these things? I said, why do you think that that is a part of, you know, something you're doing for yourself, especially if you're an adult? And so we have this system where we're not able to all pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. And I think people who use that as their bullhorn, they need to think twice, and I think they need to be educated on decades and generations and centuries of barriers that have been put in place for certain people.
You know, somehow we have to really understand and who controls it and how the narrative is being controlled. And it's obviously extremely important and can be detrimental, as we have just talked about. And, you know, I just keep thinking, it's another quote I saw by Toni Morrison. It says, the narrative is radical, creating us at the very moment it's being created. I'm going to read that again. I'm going to read that one more time.
It's deep.
Toni Morrison's quote says, narrative is radical, creating us at the very moment it is being created.
Yeah. A few thoughts come to mind. When you think about what we're dealing right now with the prison industrial system, when, you know, if you were using crack, you were a criminal. If you were using cocaine, you were an addict. And it goes on and on. Even if we think about the AIDS epidemic, the narrative that was created around that until it was no longer, you know, a certain population. Now we have to start paying attention to it. So narratives can be dangerous. And sometimes you have opposition creating narratives as we're sitting here to go out and provide more misinformation. But we have to rely on one of our tenements of our society is our education. We have to teach our children, our students, how to be able to correctly divide and understand information so that they can make a critical decision for themselves and think critically to understand that not everything you see is real and not everything that you hear is real. There are talking heads and talking points that put out these narratives. And so when they see you or me, we change that just by our mere presence. And so having the counter narrative out there is very important. And I would encourage people to be not in a safe space, but in a courageous space, to be embody that vessel of a narrative that is more human.
Absolutely. But you know, something you said I think is so key. And again, as a professor, I know you are at a place where you're helping students to open up their minds to another narrative. Because sometimes a teacher or professor can direct a certain way. Can I say that?
I mean, that is very true. And it's not even, like you said, even school age teachers are doing that. And I think it's most important too, I know we don't want to get into this topic, but that whole conversation of just get over it. But how are we going to get over something? You know that saying that if you are not taught or learn your history, you're doomed to repeat it. I feel like we're in a repeat cycle right now.
I think so.
And so when you think about that, a lot of my students that I teach are not always, this is not always their first language. They don't understand a lot of different things. And what they're taught versus the reality of African American struggle and history and the BIPOC community as a whole is nothing like what they experience in my class. And even though I'm the professor and they trust my word, I have incorporated research methods for them to go see it for themselves. And so I think it's important for us to understand that there's people who don't know the history, whether they are African American or not. And so if you don't know the real history and you only hear this narrative of get over it, it's been so long ago, and not understand that the institutional structural isms that exist prevent you from moving forward. And we have a right to our history. We have a right to learn it. So I think that absolutely education is key. But you have to have the right qualified people doing
Absolutely, absolutely. We almost finished this wonderful show, and I'm going to end with a few things. Albert Einstein said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we've used when we created them." And we're going to have another show after this, and we're going to change the narrative, and we're going to be on more of a we're going to be on another positive note, and we're going to talk about Black joy, and Black joy as an act of resistance, feeling good about ourselves in spite of the challenges in this world. So thank you so much. As always, I always love having you on my show, and I'm hoping that people have understood and heard something out of this show, and you will share information out of this show, and you will come back and watch the next show that we're going to do. It's going to be entitled Black Joy. So thank you. And have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day.